So a question I get asked from time to time is, how did you learn French? Now, because of the amount of time I've lived in France and French-speaking countries, a lot of people assume that part of my family is French, whereas in fact, I'm actually from a monolingual English family, and I learned French by myself from scratch, obviously with the help of some teachers. So in this video, I want to try and lay out what I think are the key things that have helped me to learn French and which can be used by anybody trying to learn a foreign language. So to understand my language learning philosophy and my approach to languages in general, we have to go all the way back to the year 2000, when I was 13/14. And all the way back in the year 2000, I was lucky enough to have had a tutor, a private tutor, to help me with certain school subjects. And one of the subjects that we used to work on was French. Now, this guy is a chap called Keith Coleman. Keith Coleman, who was based in Portsmouth at the time. So if you're out there, Keith, hello. And Keith was a language specialist. He was a professional translator, interpreter by trade, had lived for many years in Spain and also in France. And I think his son still now lives in Spain, but was a very good language user overall. And one of the things that Keith instilled in me right from the very beginning at the age of 13 was the use of languages to achieve a goal rather than just learning languages for their own sake. So rather than learning stock phrases about ordering drinks in restaurants or going to the market and ordering half a dozen kilos of strawberries or whatever it was, we would always work on practical language use and how to build the language in such a way that when you speak, people really understand what you're saying. And then from after that, I was lucky enough to have another fantastic language teacher whose name was Angela Morgan in the years 2002, 2003, 2004, who was at that point a French teacher at Fareham College in Hampshire, whose language department has now vanished and has not existed for many years. And again, she was a very practically minded teacher and also somebody who was very enthusiastic about using the language. So I was very lucky in the beginning to have had two very, very good teachers who instilled in me the importance of using a language to communicate and not just studying it as a school subject. And then moving on from my late teens to my early 20s, I attended the University of Surrey in Guildford, fantastic small university with a very small but dedicated language team, very small departments, small class sizes. And at the University of Surrey, I studied French and Russian with a speciality in translation. And the Centre for Translation Studies at the University of Surrey, which does still exist now and is a very successful department, was a fantastic place to learn and work, and I'm sure it still is. Small groups, we always used to have a laugh with the teachers, but not at their expense, because we really enjoyed what we were doing. So we were laughing, but we were laughing in the language that we were learning. And there was a very nice atmosphere and a lot of mutual respect between the teachers and the students. So 4 years of study at the University of Surrey, and I was lucky enough to come away with a degree in translation studies in 2010. In 2010, after my language degree, I was lucky enough to come and live in Bordeaux, where I've been ever since. And 2010, I started working as a freelance translator / interpreter for various different clients. And then in 2012, was lucky enough to start doing my PPL training in a small airfield just outside of Bordeaux. And from 2012 to 2015, was doing the PPL. And 2015 is when I started getting involved with aviation English. Now, I really like simple things. I'm not a sociolinguist. I'm not going to bring out some kind of scientific study into language learning, language acquisition, or anything like that. I like really simple answers to questions. So if I had to summarize the way that I've been able to achieve proficiency in a second language, I can probably do it with one word: experiences. So what do I mean by experiences? Experiences means having been in a situation where you've needed to use your language for some purpose or other and not having been able to do so to your own satisfaction. And the experience is what you learn from those particular situations so that the next time you're confronted with that particular situation, you will know how you're supposed to react to it. And I can honestly say that, in fact, pretty much all of the grammatical structures that I now know in French, I can trace back to a particular situation in the past where I have tried to solve a problem using my language and haven't been able to, or where I've made some kind of embarrassing mistake. First good example is the difference between the pronunciation of a single S in the middle of a word in French and a double S. So, for example, baser, to base, is pronounced almost like a Z sound in English. Whereas if it's a double S, it's pronounced like the S sound in English. So, for example, casser, like to break. And one of my very first jobs when I was a student was working in a call centre in Lyon, in the southeast of France. And I was working for the AA, not the alcoholic one, the other one, the Automobile Association. And our job was to help British drivers broken down in France with garages, etc., to help get their car fixed. A very common situation which would arise would be that a customer would break down, their car would be taken to a garage. The garage would quote a price to repair whatever it was, and the customer would think that the price was too expensive. So sometimes they would call us from the garage and they would put us on the phone and say, right, this garage guy, he's trying to rip me off, can you help? And what I wanted to do was to ask if it was possible to reduce the price of the repairs to the person's car. So in the French that I had at the time, which was not too bad, I had a fairly good grasp of grammar in those days, perhaps not as good a grasp of pronunciation as I maybe have now. I picked up the phone and I said to the guy on the end of the phone, "Est-ce qu'il serait possible de baiser les prix?" Another good example, when I was working as a tennis instructor, tennis coach. When I first arrived in France, I went to a tennis club and tried to get a little bit of work as a tennis coach there as well. And they asked me to do a trial lesson with a group of 9 or 10-year-old children. And as tennis coaches know, when you do exercises on the tennis court, quite often you will use like plastic cones to mark out places for people to aim at with their tennis ball for doing different kinds of exercises. Now, the word in French for a cone is un cône, so C-O with the circumflex and then N-E on the end. But again, I hadn't quite worked out how to properly pronounce the O sound with the circumflex on the top. And I also didn't know that the word cône is masculine and not feminine. So instead of saying what I should have said, which was "Pour cet exercice, chacun va chercher un cône," I said, "Pour cet exercice, chacun va chercher une conne." So those really are the things that make you get better in a language. You have to go through these situations where you've made a mistake, you've been misinterpreted, and you've learned so that the next time you need to use that particular phrase or that particular word, you will know how to do it. But what you really have to do is be shameless. If you start trying to speak a language, you will inevitably make mistakes. You will say things that will sound embarrassing. You will say things that make you look a bit stupid. But you have to have that confidence to just jump in and start using the language.